Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, The Questing Mom, where we do tea time book reviews, create treats for our tea time book reviews, do the occasional tea or coffee review, and today we are going to be doing book 4 of our Cold Alpha series. This one is called Iron-Hearted Alpha, and this one follows Jackson and Reagan's story. But first, we have our lovely tea, of course. We're doing honey vanilla chamomile tea today. This is one that I've definitely had quite a few times, especially when I don't feel good. I don't know, something about honey and tea just makes me feel better. And then, of course, we have our coconut chocolate chip cookies. So let's go ahead and let's start talking about Jackson and Reagan. So Jackson and Reagan's story is very interesting and very different from the first 3 books that we talked about in this series. Reagan is a very different wolf. This time, instead of us talking about alpha wolves, because a lot of the wolves in obviously the last 3 stories have been about alpha and dominant wolves, whereas Reagan is different. She's not exactly an alpha, she's not a dominant wolf. She is what they consider an omega wolf. Now this is where things get fascinating, because in typical wolf romances, omega wolves are like the bottom of the chain, worst wolves ever. They're like the slaves of the pack, in my experience in reading them at least. But in this book, an omega is almost like a healer. It's like a special healer for the pack. And I think that's very refreshing. It's a very refreshing change to the normal, like I said, omegas being kind of like the weakest of the pack. I think the interesting part of how they portray the omegas as healers is that in this case, Reagan has no idea what exactly her powers are, what her powers can do. All she knows is that she's this omega wolf, which is supposed to make her special, but she's not quite sure what that is. Now, Jackson does tend to help her out with that quite a bit. He kind of tends to give her a little bit of background story as to the omega once he finally finds out. Reagan feels the need to hide the fact from him that she is an omega wolf, but he finds out anyway, obviously, at some point. And it's kind of interesting, the villains of this story and how he finds out, because the villains of the story are pretty much random wolves that come running through. They want to cause trouble. They want to take over the land. And they're not really tied in any way to the series or to the story, which makes this the first book in the series where the villains aren't really tied to anybody or tied to the villains of any of the previous books, which I think makes it very interesting. And then, of course, you always have that one person in the pack of the villains that wants to be good, wants to behave. And you have Reagan at that point who, with her being an omega wolf and her helping them, you have her essentially reaching out and helping out this wolf that wants to be helped. And I think this is essentially how Jackson tends to find out that she is an omega wolf, because she's doing things that are not quite, I guess you could say, traditional for how regular wolves in general would react. The whole story makes it seem as if omega wolves are kind of rare and everybody wants to have one in their pack, but not everybody does. So it's kind of interesting how they take that concept. Now, another interesting concept of this book is that Jackson originally has a past. He has a past with a previous mate. Obviously, he has family in his past, but he has a very interesting past with a fated mate that he previously had that tended to break it off. Now, of course, this would not be a romance if the fated mate did not come through at any point and decide, hey, I need to be in your life. I need to fix this somehow. It's kind of to be expected in the world of books. It's not really one of those things that you're just going to leave out and not talk about. So I definitely expected at some point the ex-fated mate to show up. And of course, she does. So it made this part of the book kind of predictable, to be honest. But like I said, that's kind of the MO of how romance stories go. If there's anything that can cause a conflict or any kind of a rift in the relationship, they're going to make sure to bring it up and they're going to make sure to use it. It's pretty standard. Now, I did find it interesting how they kind of use this whole fated mate as an afterthought. Now, Reagan does obviously feel the pain. She can feel the emotions that Jackson and this basically teenager that she's helping are putting out. But I kind of find it fascinating that they kind of use that as like, oh yeah, this just kind of happened. Like it's a very nonchalant thing. And he doesn't really talk about it, obviously, until she kind of shows up. Now, part of the thing that, yes, is cliche, but I did like is the fact that even though the fated mate was there, when Reagan tried to run away and leave him alone with her, he was like, no, that's not happening. And he went after her. Again, it's cliche, but I think it's one of those cliches that's kind of expected. And if it didn't happen, then you would kind of have that whole breakup go on, which I didn't see anything in this series that would make it seem like that would ever happen. One of the things I did like about this book is it does make you feel very emotionally attached. And I think that's just because of the fact that they definitely put a big emphasis on emotions for this book. So it definitely draws you in, makes you very emotionally attached to the story. It makes you emotionally attached to the characters. And I kind of think that's how it's meant to be, like I said, because the author just kind of draws you in that way. Now, obviously, Jackson and Reagan do end up mating. I do like the fact, though, that they waited until towards the end of the book in order to do that. Like the author, in a way, dragged it out to where you had to get to know Jackson a little bit more, had to get emotionally connected a little bit more before they finally fully came together and made it, even though, yes, there were some spicy scenes in between, but it is kind of nice how the story kind of wraps up that way. So let's go ahead. I'm going to have a sip of tea, and then I'm going to give you my final rating. Okay, so my final rating for this book, I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 stars. It's very good. It's not one of my favorites, not something I want to read again, but I do feel like it feeds into the storyline very well, and I feel like emotionally it draws you in, which is essentially what kind of draws me to that story, and what kept me reading it is the fact that it just emotionally draws you in. So if you're an emotional person, you like to get emotionally attached to characters, this is definitely going to be the book for you. Go ahead, check it out. The nice thing is I feel like on the one hand, it's good to read the previous books to read this book, but at the same time, I do feel like this book could be a standalone book just because of the fact that it has all new villains. You kind of aren't associating with the pack previously, except for right at the beginning and then right at the end. But other than that, I do feel like it could be a standalone book. So if you want to check it out standalone, you can do that. And I don't think you're going to miss much of the story. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below. I'm always accepting recommendations for any kind of book to read. Obviously, I am focusing on the Kindle Unlimited books. I have a whole TBR list going right now for Kindle Unlimited, but I definitely will take any recommendations you have. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button while you're down there giving me recommendations, and I will see you all next time. Bye.